This movie is called What is Lichen? You may have heard of lichen. You may have even seen lichen out in the world. But do you know what lichen truly is? It is an amazing organism. It is made of lots of different parts that actually belong to many different kingdoms. So you can't just say lichen is part of a single kingdom of life, because it has a special story about what, or should I say, who it's made of. So, hopefully, by the end of this movie, you'll be able to answer the question, what is lichen? I hope you liken the movie. First off, in this movie, we have to introduce the main characters. One of the characters is named Freddy Fungus. Freddy Fungus was a pretty fun guy, but he had some problems. He had a really nice place to live. You can see he had a nice shaped home that held him up nice and strong through the storms and through any kind of weather that may have come his way, but he was kind of hungry. He got to absorb some dead stuff with his mycelium, but he didn't think it tasted very sweet. He missed having something in his life like sugar or dessert. And he said, I wish I could cook and be a wonderful sweet pastry chef. But alas, all I know how to do is make a nice structure for a home. And so he just sat and he thought to himself about what he should do. Another character in this movie is Algae. Algae was also a pretty exciting character. She was nice and green, and she was in the plant kingdom, and she could make so many delicious, sugary, sweet foods. You know, she didn't even have to try very hard. She never even went to chef school to learn how to cook. She just got to sit in the sun and magically, amazingly, through photosynthesis in her green body, it turned into sugar. The sun and the water and the carbon dioxide all combined inside of her and just gave her as much sugary, sweet goodness as she could ever desire. And that made her pretty happy. But sometimes she got sad. Sometimes she wished she wasn't such a slimy blob. She didn't really have a nice house to live in. She had no shape, no structure. She just, would slip through someone's fingers if they picked her up. She was just blobby and goopy, and she wished she could have a nice home that would be strong and structured. And so she thought and thought about what she should do. Luckily, one day, Freddy Fungus met Algae. And Freddy said to Algae, "Man, I wish I could eat something sweet. All I can do is build nice structured homes." And Algae said, "What? That's the opposite of my wish. All I can do is make sugary, sweet things to eat, but I cannot build a nice structured home. What if we combined forces and made something together?" Freddy Fungus thought that was a great idea, and so did Algae. So they took a liking to each other, and they made something special. Can you guess what it is if they took a liking to each other? That's right. They made lichen. Lichen is a combination of fungus and algae working together like a team. And since they both get something special out of the deal, Algae gets a nice structured home, and Freddy Fungus gets nice sugary food to eat. They call it a symbiotic relationship. That's It's called when everyone in the team gets something good out of the deal. So Freddy Fungus and Ali Algae together have a symbiotic relationship, and together they form what we call lichen. And for a long, long time, that's all scientists knew, is that lichen was made from a symbiotic relationship of fungus from the fungi kingdom and algae from the plantae kingdom. But recently they've made a new discovery. They've realized there's another member of the team. Make room, Freddy Fungus and Ali Algae. There's a new fungus in town. It's Yolanda Yeast. Yolanda Yeast is also part of the fungus kingdom, but she has a special job to do. You see how fierce she is? She is very good at keeping away predators. So the scientists have discovered that lichen has a crust built into its body that's made of yeast. And that yeast helps keep predators and other bad microorganisms from attacking the lichen. So Yolanda Yeast is kind of like the guard for the home that Freddy Fungus and Ali Algae built together in the lichen. Occasionally, it's a different character who stands in for Ali. Sometimes Ali has to go on some trips. And so when she's gone, she has a friend come stay at the house to help take care of her job of making the sugary food. And that is someone we call Cindy cyanobacteria. And cyanobacteria is part of a different kingdom that we haven't learned about yet called Monera. And Monera kingdom has regular bacteria. You can kind of see the word bacteria in the word cyanobacteria. But it also has something called cyanobacteria in it. And that is a special type of bacteria that can do photosynthesis, just like plants and just like algae can. So sometimes lichen is actually a combination of Freddy Fungus, Cindy cyanobacteria, Yolanda Yeast, all coming together to take a liken to each other to make lichen. But that's pretty rare. Usually Cindy doesn't come into the picture, and usually it's just the fungus, the algae, and the yeast all doing a symbiotic relationship to take a lichen to each other and make lichen. The end. Hopefully you learned what is lichen. Fungus, algae, and yeast, all working as a team in a symbiotic relationship to make lichen. The end. There are 3 main types of lichens out in the world, and their bodies look a little different. They kind of grow in different shapes. This stick has a marvelous example of all 3 of the main growth forms of lichen. There's one type called foliose. Kind of sounds like the word foliage, and foliage means leaves. So what do you think foliose means? You're right, it means leafy or kind of like a leaf. So if you look at the stick closely, you'll see that there's one type of lichen that looks like little flat leaves kind of pushed onto the bark of this stick. That is a foliose type of lichen. That's the category that lichen is in. There's another category of growth for lichen called fruticose, like fruity almost. And fruticose lichen is lichen that kind of has more of a 3D shape, like fruit does. So lichen that sticks up off of it or hangs down or has kind of a big clump or little hairy parts. That is going to be part of a fruticose category of lichen. And the last category of lichen is called crustose. And crustose kind of sounds like the word crusty. And that's because crustose lichen is kind of crusty or flaky lichen that just makes a little bit of a powdery crust on whatever it's growing on. So everywhere you see these little flat patches that you can't even peel off because they're just a crust on what they're growing on, like this stick, that is a crustose type of lichen. And don't be fooled about moss. Moss often grows in the same places as lichen does, but moss is not a lichen. Moss is a type of plant, all in the plantae kingdom, not a combination of different kingdoms like the lichen is. So don't get fooled by the moss. The moss is very cool, but the lichen is a whole different type of organism that has the symbiotic relationship of fungus and algae and yeast, and sometimes cyanobacteria. So those are the different types of lichen. The foliose, the ones that look kind of like foliage, like little leaves. The fruticose, the ones that have more of a big shape and structure like fruit does. And crustose, that are kind of crusty on what their surface they're growing on. So those are the three main types of lichen growth forms.
I want to show you a little bit more about what's amazing about lichen. And I found a really cool slideshow on the internet that I want to show you a few slides from to teach you the last few facts that I think you should know about lichen. So let me share my screen with you and show you what that looks like. This first picture is a microscopic photograph of a part of lichen. And you can see that green ball right in the middle that they're calling the agile cell. That is the algae. So that's the little cell of algae, and around it is the fungal hyphae, those little threads of fungus. So you can actually see it's both of those organisms together. And this is a drawing of it too. And then another thing I wanted to show you was the layers that are in a lichen's body, the structure of lichen. So there's the algae layer with those threads of the fungal hyphae, those little threads running through it. And then the cortex, the protective layer. And that's where the yeast comes in. And there's yeast that lives in there to help protect from predators and from other microorganisms that might want to attack the lichen. So those are kind of the layers and the structure of a lichen's body. And lichens are really important for a lot of things. Some birds use lichen to build their nests. Flying squirrels and some other animals like caribou eat lichen. And then humans like us have also used lichen for a long time in perfumes, in making beer, in a bunch of different things for medicines in the home, and even sometimes for bedding, diapers, dyes, train setups, floral decorations. So lichen is a pretty amazing thing. Here's a close-up of that hummingbird nest using the lichen. I think it might have a few different categories of lichen, but what is this main one we see here? Hint, it kind of looks like leaves, like foliage. Yep, it's the foliose lichen. So Anna's hummingbirds love to use foliose lichen and some moss and other types of materials like spiderweb silk in their nests. Pretty beautiful, huh? And lichens are found all over the world. They grow on really crazy surfaces that a lot of other things can't grow on. All different types of ground. They can grow on glass and metal, tree bark and wood. They can grow right on the surface of a rock, and leaves and lichen can either grow on other lichens. It's kind of amazing. They can be found in forests and deserts, the tundra, the highest mountains, and even the rocks of Antarctica. The only area that they don't think can grow lichen, although maybe they'll discover it someday, is the ocean. But you never know. But lichen's pretty amazing in all the places it grows. And I just wanted to show you a few different actual types of lichen. I taught you the 3 categories of lichen in the different ways they can grow, but in those categories, there are different named lichens. Just like categories of plants have different named plants, like the tree category of plants has palm trees and Douglas fir trees and oak trees. So in the categories of lichen, there's also differently named lichens. And so a few of the ones that you might see out and about in Seattle are frog pelt lichen. Oh my goodness. The freckle pelt lichen. Look at those little freckles. I think this is another freckle pelt lichen picture. Lung lichen. Kind of looks like the structure of your lungs. More lung lichen. Shield or wax paper lichen. There's some more of that one with some other lichen there too, but the shield wax paper one is the foliose lichen that's on the branch there. There's rag lichen. There's tube lichen. There's antler lichen, like antlers from a deer or a moose. Wow, that's pretty. There are pixie cup lichen that have these little club shapes at the top when they're reproducing. That's what helps make the spores, or those little cups at the top. And here's the British soldier lichen. The dragon cladonia lichen. Wow. Ramalina lichen. Fishnet lichen. Wow, that's gigantic. It looks like big fish nets. Beard lichen. I bet if you picked some of that and put it on your chin, you would look like you had a beard. I think that's where it gets its name. More beard lichen. Witch's hair lichen. Ooh, long and stringy like a witch. And horsehair lichen. Icelandic lichen. Wolf lichen. Ooh, looks like it has sharp teeth like wolves do. Orange sunburst lichen. I think there might even be some of that on this stick. I was looking at this stick again, and I think there's a little bit of orange. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but a little bit of orange on here. So I think that might be the orange sunburst lichen. And reindeer lichen. Wow, big mats of it. I've seen this type of lichen a lot up in the San Juan Islands, like on Orcas Island or Lopez Island. So maybe if you've been up there, you've seen big spreads of this type also, of the reindeer lichen all over the ground. And then some of the crustose lichens are the dust lichen. It literally looks like dust on a tree. I think that's why they call it dust lichen. They also have a barnacle lichen, map lichen, and this one's even kind of in the shape of a heart. Bullseye lichen, and a clump of moss. But remember, moss is not lichen, it's a plant. Devil's matchstick lichen, mixed in with a little bit of moss in there also. And fairy barf. What? That is kind of funny. I guess if fairies barfed, they would make tiny little barf piles, just like that lichen. I guess that's why they call it fairy barf. And that's it from this slideshow. I'm going to link in the newsletter that you get from the teachers to another website that looks like this, called the Mushroom Observer, that has a whole list of 151 lichens that live in Washington State, all in alphabetical order. And I challenge you to go on a lichen hunt and try to see if you can find some of these lichens, or if you can just find some that, kind of like I did, that represent the different categories of growth. See if you can find some foliose lichen, some fruticose lichen, and some crustose lichen. So send me some photos or some little video clips if you find any,